Welcome back to Teen Tutors. In today's video, we are going to be covering all of the types of SAT grammar questions that you're going to see on the exam. That way you can perfect your standard English conventions. Without any further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, so the first type of question we need to understand on the SAT grammar is boundaries between clauses. So what does this look like? This looks like us getting A, B, C, and D being basically all of the same words, and the only difference is the punctuation we have between them. So what we do here is we create a physical boundary between these words, and we also cross out any extra coordinated conjunctions or just transition words. All right, so this word "and," we're just going to get rid of it for now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a sentence that goes all the way up to the word microsculptures, and then we're going to create another sentence that starts with the words creations, right? So that would look something like this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to identify, are these two sentences going to be independent or dependent clauses? And that will inform what our answer is going to be on these questions. So for this one, we would read, okay, Jamaican British artist Willard Wiggin is known for his remarkable microsculptures. And we say, okay, that's an independent clause. That's pretty good, right? And then the second part, we say, creations so small that they are best viewed through a microscope, Wiggin's sculptures are made from tiny natural materials. And so that also is an independent clause. That can function as its own sentence, right? And so what we then do is this will inform, all right, well, we need to separate two independent clauses with a comma, fanboys, or a semicolon, or a period. So what I'm then going to do is I'm going to get rid of this blocked off and I'm also just going to get rid of these lines. So now we can look at this. And so the first thing is, okay, well, in answer choice A, we don't have what I just said. We don't have a comma, fanboys. We don't have a period. We don't have a semicolon. So that can't be right. Same with answer B. While we do have a comma, it's not met with a fanboys, right? We need a comma, fanboys to separate two independent clauses. So that's also wrong. Now, answer choice C, that has a period. That works. But just to make sure, answer choice D is incorrect because while it does have a fanboys with the word and, it doesn't have a comma, right? So answer choice D is wrong. And therefore, the only answer choice that's left is answer choice C. Now, the next question that we could also use as an example for this is this one. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing here. We're basically given answer choice A, B, C, and D are the same exact words, but it's just different punctuation. And so I'm going to physically demarcate between them, and then I'm going to cross out the word and now I'm just going to write a sentence that reads up to the word quilts, and then I'm going to write a sentence that begins with the word the, right? So it would look something like this. When viewed up close, however, the portraits reveal themselves to be quilts. So this sentence is an independent clause, right? That works. But then if we look at the second one, the stitching barely visible among the thousands of pieces of printed microcut fabric. So that does not sound like it could be its own sentence. So therefore, it is a dependent clause. And so what we do now is we say, okay, well, with a dependent clause, we can't use a comma, fanboys, or a period, or a semicolon. So let's now take off this block on the word and let's just take off the blocks. And so for A, comma, fanboys, that wouldn't work, right? We can't separate an independent clause and a dependent clause with a comma and a fanboys. So A is wrong. Then for B, we have a comma and only a comma, right? So we don't have a comma, fanboys. We don't have a period. We don't have a semicolon. So I'm going to leave that for now. Now for C, we have a semicolon. And like I said, we can't use a semicolon to separate between an independent and dependent clause, right? So that's wrong. And then finally D, we have a period. And so if we have a period here, again, we can't do that because we can't do that for independent and dependent clauses. And so therefore, that's also wrong. And then our answer has to be B. Now continuing, the next thing you have to understand is transitions with semicolons. So what's going to happen in these questions is, first of all, we're going to have to determine if we have a semicolon. And second of all, we're going to have to determine if we do have a semicolon, where do we put the transition? The transition here being the word however, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is let's just cross out this word however and just figure out if we need a semicolon. All right, so what I would do here is I'm going to just create a sentence just like in the previous ones. I'm going to create a sentence that goes up to the word single-handedly, and then I'm just going to create a sentence that starts after this punctuation, right? So I'll just start a sentence that begins with the word all, right? So let's look at this. The first one would be, Okinawa doesn't make such decisions single-handedly, right? So that works as its own sentence, right? So that is an independent clause. And then the second part, we have all historical designations must be approved by a group of 9 other experts from the fields of architecture, history, and Hawaiian culture. So that also makes sense as an independent clause. And so therefore, we're going to have to separate them with a period, a semicolon, or a comma and a fanboys, right? So let's take off this block on the word however. And let's look at this. So answer choice A and B, they both have semicolons, right? So C and D do not, right? And they also don't have a comma, fanboys, or a period, right? So answer choice C and answer choice D are both going to be wrong. Now the question is, where do we put the transition? And so what we need to do is we need to say this word, however, it shows a contrast. So are we showing a contrast to the previous sentence, or is the second clause of the sentence we're looking at showing a contrast to the first part, right? So if we look, the first part of the passage says that this sociologist sits on the review board tasked with adding new sites to the Hawaii Register of Historic Places, which includes these places. And then it says Okinawa doesn't make such decisions single-handedly. And then after that it says all historical designations must be approved by a group of 9 other experts from the fields of architecture, blah, 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 right? So it looks like this second part of the sentence is agreeing with the first part. It is not disagreeing. And we would use however if it's disagreeing, right? But this first clause, Okinawa doesn't make such decisions single-handedly, that shows a contrast from the previous, right? It shows kind of saying that, okay, well, this person sits on the review board. However, they are not making the decisions alone, right? So therefore, answer choice B would not be right. Our answer would be then A, okay? So continuing on, the next thing that you really need to understand on the SAT is subject modifier. Okay, this is tested so much. And what this looks like is we're given a sentence that starts by describing something and then a comma, and then they ask what comes after the comma. Here's what we do. So we read this first part of the sentence. We read, knowing that flying insects keep their backs pointed towards sunlight during the day, comma. And then we have this blank. Here's what we do. We ask ourselves, who knew that flying insects keep their backs pointed towards sunlight during the day? We ask ourselves, what's the answer? And we look for that answer at the beginning of our answer choices. So it looks here like it's the researchers, right? It is the researchers that know that flying insects keep their backs pointed toward the sunlight. And so with subject modifier, here's what happens. This first part of the sentence is called the subject modifier, this first part that is before the blank. And then after that, you need the subject. Okay, so the subject is the answer to the question I just posed. So the subject is the researcher. So any answer choice that doesn't have the researchers right after the comma is wrong. So therefore C is wrong and D is wrong. And then what comes after the subject? Because now we're between A and B. What comes after the subject? After the subject has to be a verb, right? So theorize, that is a verb. That's an action, right? But theory, that's a noun. That is not a verb, right? So our answer there has to be A. Right? So another example of subject modifier is this one, where we have the same type of thing. So we read this first part of the sentence, we say, based on events that occurred when Rabbinaw was a city-state ruled by a king, and we ask ourselves, what is based on events that occurred back when Rabbinaw was a city-state ruled by a king? And we look for the answer, and it looks like it's Rabbinaw Achi, right? That's the name of the story, right? So that's the answer to this question. And so again, we should have the subject modifier, and then right after the comma, we should have the subject, right? And so if we just look at this, no other answer choice even has Rabbinaw Achi in the answer, right? So the verb part doesn't even matter, right? Even though we know that we need a subject and then a verb, most of the time, only one of the answer choices will even have a subject after the comma and have it be the correct subject, right? So therefore, all of our other answer choices are wrong because they don't say Rabbinaw Achi. And just to be certain, the word tells after that subject is a verb, right? So that goes along with this rule. Are you guys struggling to understand all the types of punctuation on the SAT grammar, or failing to understand how to use all of the math equations on the SAT? Well, look no further. You can go to the link in the description of this video to find our Teen Tutors Buck Soup shop, where you can purchase our math and English cheat sheet for the exam for only $1 each. Through our hundreds of hours of tutoring with our clients, we've come up with the most important topics you need to understand before you even start studying for the SAT. That way you can get a head start above your competition. So if this is something that interests you, make sure to check that link in the description of this video. Okay, so the next topic we have to understand is the it-they test. So what the it-they test looks like is when we have a question where all the verbs are the same and it's just a different version of that same verb, what we're going to do is employ the it-they test. So what we do is we say, okay, what is doing the underlying? We're going to circle it. If that answer is singular, then we're going to call it an it. If it's plural, then we're going to call it a they. And then you'll see what we're going to do with that, right? So if we read this, in her 1983 book, The Managed Heart, Commercialization of Human Feeling, sociologist Arlie Russell Hochschild first explored at length her conception of a sociology of emotions, the idea that the various cultural and ideological frameworks a person has internalized, class, gender, political affiliation, etc., blank each emotional reaction that person has within a situation. So here we ask ourselves, okay, what is doing the underlying? And the answer is the frameworks. The frameworks are doing the underlying. And so the frameworks are a they, right? Frameworks is plural. So we say, okay, they underlies. Does that make sense? For me to say they underlies. And the answer is no, right? So that's wrong, right? And then we say, okay, they is underlying, right? They is underlying. We say, okay, does that work? And the answer there is again, no, right? And so then we say they underlie. And we ask ourselves, okay, does that work? They underlie? I would say that, right? So I would leave that. And then we have they has been underlying, right? And we ask ourselves, does that work? Right? And the answer is no, they has been underlying. That also doesn't make sense. So the answer here is just they underlie. The answer here would be C. Right? So continuing, we have another example of the it-they test. This is very important to understand. And so here we have focus, right? So we have focusing. So we ask ourselves, what is doing the focusing? We need to circle it. And again, if it is singular, it will become it. If it is plural, it will become they. So here we have 10 of William Shakespeare's plays are classified as histories, although each one of these plays, which include Henry V and Richard III, blank on a single historical figure, specifically an English king. Some, such as Henry VI Part 1 and Henry VI Part 2, feature different episodes from the same monarch's life. Right? So first we ask ourselves, what is doing the focusing? And the answer here is each one of the plays. And then we say, is that singular or plural? Well, each one. It says each one. That means it's singular. So it becomes it. And so we do the same exact thing here. We're going to say, okay, it focuses. Does that make sense? It does. It sounds good, right? So then we say it focus. Would I say it focus? No, I wouldn't, right? So that's wrong. Then we say it are focused, right? Would I say it are focused? No, I wouldn't, right? So that's also wrong. And then I say it were focused. Would I say it were focused? Again, I would not say that, right? So the answer here would be A, it focuses. Now, before I get into the next question, a whopping 98% of viewers to this channel are not subscribed. So make sure that if you find videos like this one helpful, you subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on any future content. So the next thing we do have to understand simply is apostrophes, right? And these are pretty simple. So basically, we're going to have a question where the words are all basically the same, and we just have to determine where do the apostrophes go. So remember, apostrophes show ownership. We check the word right after the quote-unquote apostrophe word, right? That's the word that we are determining if we need an apostrophe to see if it should have an apostrophe. Remember, we should not have verbs being owned. Okay, a verb cannot be owned. Additionally, we basically always just look at the word right after that word. Okay, in real writing, that's not always the case, but on the SAT, that will be the case. So let's read this. It can take time for proposed amendments to the U.S. Constitution to become law. For example, the 22nd Amendment, which limits the number of terms presidents can serve, was proposed in 1947, but wasn't approved by the required 3/4 majority of state legislatures until 1951. So here we ask ourselves, okay, does the word terms own the word presidents? And the answer is no. Terms does not own the word presidents. Okay, so immediately there, B and C are wrong because they have an apostrophe on the word terms, which would mean that they're showing ownership, right? And then we say, okay, does the word presidents own the word can? Presidents surely cannot own the verb can because we cannot show ownership for a verb, right? So therefore D would also be wrong, and then our answer choice would just be A. It would be no apostrophes, right? So another good example of this would be this question, okay? And so let's take a look again. So remember, again, apostrophes will show ownership. We check the word right after the apostrophe word to see if it should have an apostrophe. However, here there's another thing we have to take into account, and that is when we have word apostrophe s, so we have the apostrophe coming before the s, that means that it is singular. And we have an apostrophe after the s, that means it's plural, okay? So let's take a look here. We have Chang Deng and her colleagues at the University of Washington recently ran simulations to determine the extent to which individual snow grains' physical properties affect the amount of light reflecting off a snowy surface. So let's take a look at this one. So the grains, they own their physical properties, right? The grains own their physical properties. So we would say, okay, D is wrong. Even if you didn't know if the grains were plural or singular here, you could immediately cross out D. And then you could say, okay, well, the physical properties cannot own the verb effect, right? We cannot own a verb, right? So properties should not have an apostrophe, right? So A is wrong and C is wrong, and therefore B is correct. Now, just to show you guys, the reason why we have this apostrophe after the S is because we're talking about several snow grains, right? We're talking about a lot of different snow grains and how they or how their physical properties affect the light reflecting off a snowy surface, right? So that's why we have that apostrophe after the S. Okay, so the last topic we need to understand here is going to be verb tense. So what does that look like? Well, it looks eerily similar to the questions where we're going to have to use the it-they test, and we actually are first going to use the it-they test, but let's look at what happens if we do that. Right, so I'll just start reading from here. In addition, Zufall blank selling the product under a child-friendly name, right? So we would say, okay, who's doing the suggesting? And the answer there is Zufall, right? And so that's an it. Just one person is an it. So look at what happens if we do use the it-they test. So we would say, okay, it suggested, that works. It suggests, that works. It had suggested, that works. It was suggesting, that also works. All four of these work. So we need to say, okay, we need to either pick the correct verb tense that's going to do one of the following two things. One, it's either going to match verbs from other sentences, right? So it's going to, if one said arrived, right, we're going to use suggested, right? That matches up. If one says arrives, we're going to use suggests, and so on. Or it needs to make sense within the clause that it is in, right? So first, let's look at the first thing. So it looks here like we have, okay, in the 1950s, a man named Joseph McVicker was struggling to keep his business afloat when his sister-in-law, Kay Zufall, advised him to repurpose the community's product, a non-toxic clay-like substance, for removing soot from wallpaper as a modeling putty for kids. In addition, Zufall blank selling the product under a child-friendly name, Play-Doh. So look at this. The word advised, right? That's a verb from another sentence, right? So we need to match with the word advised. And so which one of these answer choices matches up with the word advised? And the answer there is suggested, right? Suggested matches up with that word. So that's why it is our answer. Now that's going to be it for the video today. Make sure that if you guys enjoy other videos like this one, you make sure to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. We're trying to bring out 1 or 2 videos every single week for you guys up until the June SAT, as well as making SAT videos throughout the summer. That way we can help you guys push forward against your competition. Make sure that if there's anything you are still confused about, you leave a comment in the comment section so that we or one of your fellow viewers can help you understand how to answer that question. Thank you guys, and we'll see you guys next time.